Okay. So what happened is that Max was delivering Tomcha Shabbos to this Yid, and this Yid didn't even have a touchtone phone, so he couldn't even buzz in people who were coming to him. And the person was always there. He was always waiting downstairs for Max because he couldn't get buzzed up. And he never ever missed. He was always there. And this Thursday night he wasn't there. So right away Max knew this is trouble. So he called Alicia Planka, who runs the Tomcha Shabbos deliveries. And Alicia says, let's try again tomorrow. They tried again tomorrow again, he didn't show up. So they went to the super and they said, you got to let us into his apartment. There's got to be something very bad. They go into his apartment, and in fact, he's dead on the floor. And in talking, Max explained what he was there for, to bring him food. And she said, bring him food. My husband works in the bank. This is the lady, the super. My husband works in the bank that he uses, and he has $7 million in his bank account. Now, they couldn't find a relative at the time, so the government takes everything. And Max wrote a letter on behalf of Tomcha Shabbos that we've done so much for him over the years, and he had all this money. Really, that money, a lot of that money should get kicked back to the Moisés. And Yosy Simon had a claim for money. Eventually, they did find the next of kin, a sister that he had that lived in Florida. But even though they gave her money, they did give a significant amount of money to Tomcha Shabbos, and even a bigger amount of money, Max told me, to Yosy Simon, which was a nace, that the government should actually give that money back, not steal it. That was number one. The other story that I mixed it up with was a completely different story where they had been giving Tomcha Shabbos to somebody for a very long time, and he left all of his money to the Salvation Army. So they told the Salvation Army, here we gave all this type of money. Zev Zlotnik wrote this letter. Here we gave all this type of help to Tomcha Shabbos, to this person, and he left all his money. We feel it's only fair. You should give us a nice donation. Well, the Salvation Army refused to give him a penny, but what they did do is they said, from now on, whenever we get kosher food that we can get our hands on, we'll send it to you. So Tomcha Shabbos normally only sends out things that are Pas Yisrael and Chol Yisrael, but they get a lot of cookies and they get a lot of peanuts from the Salvation Army, and that's why you find that in their Tomcha Shabbos packages. So for short, we can say that all they got from the Salvation Army were peanuts. But those were the two stories. Okay, now we are on Daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis. We're 3 lines from the bottom of the Gemara.
It still applies now.
Yeah, at the they give Tomcha Shabbos a lot of kosher food. Zok the Gemara. 3 lines from the bottom of Daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis. Rabbi Abba have a tzayir zuzay b'sudre. The way he would distribute money, he wanted to do in such a way where it was discreet, where people wouldn't be embarrassed to take. So what he would wrap it up in a shmata. Imagine you're putting it into a knapsack. For shadi leilachar, he would throw the knapsack over his back. Therefore, he couldn't see if anybody opened up his knapsack to go and take out money. And he would allow himself to go to places where aniyim were there, and they can go into the knapsack and help themselves. But he also looked back a little bit to see if there were any crooks, which I don't understand what this means, and maybe you can help me. And let's see what Rashi says, and then I'll tell you what I don't understand. Rashi is 4 lines from the bottom. If you look sort of to the back, a ramai, a crook, shouldn't come and reach into his knapsack. He can make himself like he's an ani. Because the normal way is aniyim come, open up the knapsack and take money out. There could be a person who's not poor will do that, so he looked back. So my question is, if he couldn't see the people because he didn't want them to feel uncomfortable, how did he see the ramai? So I don't understand how this worked. How it was matlein? Unless what it means is, since he looked like he was looking back a little bit, he intimidated somebody from coming if they weren't legit, but not that he actually saw who they were. So that's what I was struggling with, exactly how did this matlein work if he couldn't see the people anyway. So that's what I thought, that it's just it's a deterrent. If anybody has a shot that makes more sense, please share with me. Zok to Gemara weiter. Rab Chanina havahu ani davaragol l'shturele arba zuzei kolmali Shabbos. Rab Chanina had an ani who he would give 4 to every Erev Shabbos. And if you remember, we had Mar Ukva also gave money to an ani, And remember, one week he sent his son, and the son comes back and says, Tati, you give them money? They don't need money. They're rich. I saw them sprinkling expensive wine on fire to vaporize it, to make aroma. That's a rich man's activity. So why would you be giving them money? So how did Marukva react? He says, oh, if I would have known that he's accustomed to the finer things in life, I would give him more. And he doubled down on what he gave. This story had a different conclusion. What happened was he would send money kol mali shops. 1 week he didn't deliver the money himself, rather he asked his wife to do it. Also, she came back and she told him, this family doesn't need money. My choshes, what makes you say? What did you see that tells you that they don't need money? So she said, I didn't see. Shimmy, I heard. They were saying to each other, someone asked the homeowner who's getting the tzedakah, what type of fine tablecloths do you use? White tablecloths like pishtan, which is compared to kesef, or colorful tablecloths like talizov. So obviously they're dealing with these fancy fabrics. Clearly they don't need money. So right after that, I said, I don't understand what happened. I could understand this happening. Her husband, they're making a simcha. She sends her husband to the tablecloth gemach, and he calls his wife and he says, there's different types of tablecloths here. There's white, there's colored. Which one should I get? But I guess they knew that he wasn't at the gemach. The question is, why over here do we assume that the guy's a crook and he's rich? And why over there, when he was being mezalef wine, do we say he just needs more? So the Mefarshim tell us that could be that, you could justify someone who's used to having the zilaf of wine, and therefore he needs to get it even from tzedakah. But I guess fancy tablecloths are so over the top, you can't say that someone is used to that. And therefore, that was good proof, in fact, that this guy was a crook. So you would think, oh, the guy was a crook, I want my money back. No, he was happy with it. I knew the Amar Rabbi Lozer. So Rabbi Chananya said, instead of getting angry, he said, no, Baruch Hashem, we've been giving money to a crook. We should owe a toiva for the crooks. You know why? If it wasn't for them, we would be doing a virus every single day. And Rashi explains on the second line. How often do we see a Mashiach coming around and we slip around the side to get out from paying him, from giving him? We avoid paying him. That's very bad for us. But now I always have an excuse. The guy was probably a Ramai. So therefore, since we have this justification, we're not so condemned for not doing tzedakah properly. Shenemar, it says, "V'kora alecha Hashem," the only will cry about you to Hashem. V'haya b'cha chet, you'll have an avera. V'tani Reb Chiya bar Rav midifti. Reb Shua ben Karcha Imer, kol hamaylim eino v'nat tzedakah. Someone who looks away and covers his eyes from a need when it's supposed to be there. Ki ilu oived avodas kachavim. It's like he's oived avodas zara, and the Mefarshim say it's because you think it's your money. It's the Rebbeinu Shalom's money. You're not God. You're just holding a pikadon. Someone who avoids tzedakah, it's keilu oived avodas kachavim ksevhacha hishamer lecha peniyah davar medvacha b'lial. Speaking about Shemitah, thank you, Moshe, for giving out the principles. Someone might not want to lend money before Shemitah, helping somebody else, referring to holding back from doing tzedakah. When it comes to avodah zarah, yotza anoshim b'nei b'lial. Mala alon avodas kachavim, afkan avodas kachavim. Withholding tzedakah is kilu you're doing avodah zarah. So if we have an excuse that the guy was a crook, then it's a little bit easier for us to be zoicha b'dim.
Look behind him and not see if it's a crook, but he never looked at the actual people who came to.
So how did he know the guy to weed out a crook? We didn't look at the people.
No, like you said before, he was looking behind him so that the crooks.
So he was a deterrent. He wasn't actually seeing them.
Right.
Okay. Let's talk about Tanur Rabbanan. Hamasama is saying that someone who makes believe he's blind because he wants to garner mercy from people around him. Or Vamatzav is bitna, someone who makes his belly fat. To make himself look ill. Someone who makes it look like he has a shriveled hip, so he walks around with a limp. Someone does it for fake. He's going to end up having that real problem. All of our mothers tell us, don't sit in the wheelchair, right? Don't go hold the cane, right? Don't go with crutches, right? So this is the Gemara.
It's not just the heart. The Gemara is a tradition of It tells you this think this is from our Mishnah.
Okay, yeah.
And
So-
it's straight up.
It says over here, it's going to happen. Zok the Gemara, hamakabel tzedakah bein tzarich likach. If someone takes tzedakah and he didn't need it, he's a crook. Eventually, he's going to need tzedakah. It's not awesome. The halacha is that you're not allowed to take leka chikram payah if you have 200 zuz. If you have less than 200 zuz, then you're allowed to take leka chikram payah. What if you have 180 zuz of leka chikram payah, but you have a nice dining room set that you could sell for 50 zuz? That'll put you over the edge. So do you have to liquidate your assets so that you have that money, or do we count your assets as part of what your net worth is, legabe taking payah? So it says you don't have to, right? This is always the question of what a tuition committee can demand, although it's not a good comparison because tuition is not tzedakah. And, there are certain people who don't have a lot of income, but they have a lot of assets and investments. And the tuition committee says you need to liquidate your stocks, your bonds, your RSPs. And he says, no, I don't have income. So that's always a question. I'm not going to weigh in on that question. But the question is, no one's going to suggest that you have to sell your dining room set to pay tuition. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Lowy told me this story himself. And Rabbi Lowy told me that a younger man, I believe I know who the younger man is, had a tuition break. And it turned out at the end of the year that he had an extra $5,000-$6,000. So he asked the Rav, we don't really have a proper dining room set. We have a folding table with miscellaneous types of folding chairs, and we would like to buy a dining room set. But on the other hand, if I have extra money, maybe I should be giving you the tuition. What should I do? So Rabbi Loy told me, I told him, Avada, you should buy a dining room set. You shouldn't give it to tuition. If there's a question of upgrading to some fancy dining room set, sure, that's not appropriate. But a person is supposed to live like a mensch, and therefore having a normal dining room set is not considered something extravagant. That will come before. Anyway, the law is up to Gemara. A person is not supposed to liquidate assets to bring up his net worth, so that he shouldn't be able to take tzedakah. But Tanya, we learned, if he was using gold, he has to downgrade. If he's being mishtamish b'chli chesef, he has to downgrade. But if you're on a tuition committee, you would say, if you're mishtamish b'chli zahav, go straight to the chesef. You don't go to chesef first. Amar Abzvid, I remember after my father died, my father was on the committee. My father, Allah Shalom, was on the tuition committee in Bishaka for a long time. So people who had good experiences with him came over to me. We got a lot of letters from people who used to go to my father to the tuition committee. And one person came over to me, he didn't tell me a letter. He actually walked right up and says, "Oi, your father," I don't want to imitate him because you'll know who he is. "Your father was such a nice man. I remember when I used to go to the tuition committee, I was also building a house at the time. And we were putting in hardwood floors. And in those days, the standard hardwood floors were just slats. And the fancy people had herringbone. Remember when herringbone was in thing? And I was showing off to your father, I'm putting herringbone floors into my house. And I remember your father telling me, Moshe Pipik, whatever his name was, I'm so happy for you that you're having herringbone floors. But why did you have to tell me? I'm on the tuition committee. Don't tell me these things. I forgive you with the ganze heart, but please don't tell these things to me. So he says, your father was so nice about it. Like he didn't start screaming at me and now say you want for tuition. But he said, you have to know where to flaunt and where not to flaunt. But it's like me. It's like me. When the Shadchanim come to talk to me, I have to talk about how rich I am. And then when the tuition committee comes to me, I have to show them how poor I am, right? The worst thing that could happen to me is if the guy who works on the tuition committee calls to read me a shidduch. That'll kill me because I'm not going to know what to do. Zok the Gemara. It's not fair. When do we say you have to liquidate your assets and downgrade? Which is not so troublesome to get other products. But your own dishes, you're going to be echoed from using, downgraded dishes. Why do you make such a distinction? You say it's me to me. It's not acceptable to me. Amarava, you're right. Amarava, when do we say you need to downgrade? That's b'macharesha de kasba, with a plow of silver. Who in the world uses a silver plow? The teretz is someone has an English son-in-law, and his son-in-law doesn't want to go to work. So he says, I'm giving you a gold plow. It's gold, but you have to work. But Avada, that's not pshat. Rishonim tells us machresha here doesn't mean a plow, it means a comb. But machresha the kaspa, if you have a silver comb, that you would have to liquidate. So anything that's really uncomfortable to liquidate, to have to use some lower grade thing that's a very not geschmack, that you would never force someone to do. But if it's something that's so extravagant, like a silver comb, that you would make them liquidate. There's a different nafkamina. It depends when we're asking him to liquidate. If it's a question of a person does not have 200 zuz and he wants to take lekachik and payah, but if he liquidates it, he'll have more. That you're not going to force him to do. But what happens if a guy had more than 200 zuz and he illegally took lekachik and payah? Now he has to pay it back. To pay it back, you'll force him even to sell his personal effects. Frek Toys on Rashi, leket shikha pay back. Is it not a moment shein l'toivim? Who's going to be toveim? It's gojul saniyim. Which individual only is going to be toveim? But the question is, we're talking about forcing him, monning him. Who's going to mon him? There's nobody to mon him. So Toys says it's speaking about a gabbai tzedakah. If a gabbai tzedakah gives someone money, and it turns out that that person was not entitled to the money, the gabbai tzedakah could take him to Bezdin and force him to liquidate to pay back. Zok the heilige Mishnah weiter. So we learned earlier that there's generally a standard nadin that's given to a girl who marries from the estate of her father if she's a Yisayma, and it's generally 10% of the value of the estate. Did you ever think what would happen if there's $10 or if there's $12? If each one takes 10%? The Gemara is going to discuss that later on. But here you have a Yisayma. She was willing, she went into the marriage and she accepted all the terms of the marriage, including the chasfula b'meya or b'chamishim zuz. They gave her an amount, but they shortchanged her. They didn't give her 10% of the value of the estate for her natin. They gave her less, and she accepted as a ketana. Once she becomes an adult, she could take them to the Torah and extract from them her full 10%. Because a ketana, her mechila is not a mechila. So even though she didn't protest during the marriage, that doesn't mean anything at all. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the father was zoicha to be alive, to marry off at least one daughter, so there we know exactly what type of natin he gives. The second one and all the other children get the same amount that he gave for the first. Now, the Chacham say that's not a good idea. That won't work because a person's status is not always the same. Or either he lost money or he became much wealthier. It's a flat rate. You look at the estate and you give her 10% of the estate. Omar Shmuel said Allah. When it comes to giving that, and when it comes to deciding how much money from the estate we take to give the girl for nadin, shamin ba'av, what we do is we don't look at the value of the estate. Rather, we look at the father and we say, what would this man have given? And based on what Bezdin shots is up, what this man would have given, that's how much money they're going to take from the estate to give this girl for nadin. Daughters that are Yosoimim get Mizoinos and Parnasa from the estate of their father. Ketan, how does it work? We don't do the umdina like Shmuel said and figure out what her father would have given her. No, that's not the right approach. Rather, you take a percentage of the assets that are there. My love, what does it mean when the bride says umisparnasois? It means parnasas abal, which is the nadin. And our brisa says that you assess it based on the value of the estate, which is a direct stira to what Shmuel said, that when it comes to nadin, you assess what the father would have wanted to give. Amar of Nachman Yitzchak lohi. That's not what the brisa means, umisparnasois. What the brisa means is the parnasas atzma. It's talking about a girl, a young girl, a yisoima, gets to live off the estate. We know it's one of the Tnoi Ksuba, that the girls that are born, they will be able to live off the estate ad the tibagrun until they become a boigeris, an adult, or atatilach and legavin until they're married. So that's what we're talking about. And that is dependent upon the value of the estate. You don't say what the father would have wanted. But Avada, when it comes to Natan, Shmuel is right that you give what the father would have wanted. Frankly, more, how could you say that Parnasa means what she's taking to live off while she's single? The Brisa says two things: Hanizonis u misparnasas katani. So my love, Achas is Parnasas Abal, the Achas Parnasas Latzma, Parnasas Latzma. One of them, Nizonis, must mean what she's living off while she's single, which means misparnas has to be referring to something else. Well, what else could it be referring to if not the Natan that she's going to get? And once again, the Brisa says that you don't figure out what the father would have wanted to give. Like Shmuel says. So actually, both cases of the Brisa are referring to what she's getting before she's married, nothing to do with Natan. So what are these two items? Mizonis means the food that she eats, but the Sparnasas means the clothing and other things that she's entitled to. When she's being supported, it's not just food that she gets, there's other things as well, and that's what the Brisa is referring to. Meaning, at this point, the Gemara is saying that anything that she's getting as part of the ksuba, as part of the ksuba of the father's Tanakh ksuba that he's supporting her, that's based on the value of the assets. But Natan, which is a separate thing, it's not in the Tanakh ksuba. Natan is based on what the best assesses the father would have given. Tanan, now we're going to bring a raya from our Mishnah. The Chachamim argued on Rabbi Yehuda, and they said you can't give the same amount of Natan that the father gave to the first daughter when he married her off while he was alive. Why? Because sometimes a person is not in the same status, so he wouldn't necessarily be able to give what he gave last time. Ella, therefore, you base the amount of Natan on the current assets. So let's analyze what this Brisa means, what this Mishnah means. My ani and my usher. What are we talking about? Someone became rich, someone became poor. Ilema ani ben achasim, and usher means usher ben achasim. If it means actually is not worth what happened, that doesn't make sense, because it's only the Chachamim who say that you have to worry about if he became poor. It seems like Rabbi Yehuda says, no matter what, even if he became poor, if he gave $1 million to the first daughter, we need to take $1 million to the second daughter. Michlal the Tanakama Savar, Afilu Asher Behani, Kidimikari, Avina Law. Does that mean the Tanakama holds that we don't care if there's a change in the finances? We still give the subsequent daughters the same amount that the father gave to the first daughter? It's impossible. Halesle. There's no money there. There is no money in the estate. So it's an impossibility. So how could we possibly say that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you give money from the estate to Natan if the estate doesn't have that money? Elolav, what it must mean is, of course, there's money in the estate. And what it means, ani, it's ani b'das, and usher is usher b'das. Not that he lost money, he became poor in his head. We know when people are young, they spend way more than they have. They drive fancier cars than they should, and they buy things that they shouldn't. Why? Because they're spending money they don't have. That's called an usher b'das. And then there's something called an ani b'das. That's an old man who's a multimillionaire who might take bilkas from shul and slip them in his pocket to take them home with him, so he shouldn't have to buy bread, right? I always tell people that I never had a coffee that I liked, because I like a coffee with 2 sugar cubes. If I'm making myself a coffee at home, I don't want to spend 2 sugar cubes. I'll only put 1 in. But if I'm drinking the coffee in the Bismedish, it's free. I'll put in 3. So I never have a coffee the way I like it. So that's Ani B'das and Osher B'das. Vikatani, and it says in our Mishnah, Shaman Esan Achasim v'Noistin. What does the Chachamim say at the end of our Mishnah? Even though we know that the father would not have wanted to give so much money, because we're talking about Ani B'das, Asher B'das, we know he wouldn't have wanted to give so much money, we still make the assessment based on the value of the estate, and we ignore what the father would have wanted to give. Alma Loyas Lina Basar Umdina, Utiyov to the Shmuel. So now it's a catch on Shmuel, because the Chachamim in our Mishnah clearly state that you always give a percentage of the value of the estate. And you don't look at you don't put yourself into the father's mind to try to figure out what he would have wanted to give. So it's Shaver on Shmuel. So Dr. Gemara, you're right. Who the Omar Rabbi Yehuda? In fact, Shmuel is inconsistent with the sheet of the Chachamim in our Mishnah. Shmuel also Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, who says you give the same amount that the father gave for the first child. Who the Omar Rabbi Yehuda? The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Aimer Im Heisi Bas Harishayna Eaton L'Shenius Kederach Shanas on Rishayna. Frank the Gemara, it sounds from Shmuel like he's saying his own Chiddush Halacha. If he's just passing like Rabbi Yehuda, let him just come out and say that. The name of Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. So Gemara, it's very important for Shmuel to paraphrase what Rabbi Yehuda said, and not just to say I pass him like Rabbi Yehuda, because Shmuel is teaching us how to understand Rabbi Yehuda. If you just read Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, you would misunderstand it. Shmuel needs to make sure we understand the full scope of what Rabbi Yehuda meant. In other words, if Shmuel would have just said Allah Rabbi Yehuda and left us to figure out what Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah meant, Havamina, when do you say that you follow the umdana of what the father wants to give? That's if you have clear evidence. Dafka hisia. That's only if the father had married off a daughter before he died. The goli daite, you know with clarity precisely what he wanted to give for nothing. Avoloyisia. But if he never married off a daughter, and we have to go make an assessment of what he would give if he would marry off a daughter, that's not nearly as accurate. Loy, maybe you don't do that and you just give 10% of the assets. Kamash Malon, that time of the Rabbi Yehuda, the reason of Rabbi Yehuda is the Azlinun Basar Umdana, Loishna Hisia, Veloishna Lo Hisia. It doesn't matter if he had already made a wedding or not, we will assess the value. And that's the Chiddush of Shmuel, that Rabbi Yehuda didn't only say it when he already married someone off, and you know precisely how much he wants to give. Rabbi Yehuda even said the halacha in a bigger Chiddush where he never married somebody off and we're just figuring it out. So frankly more, so why didn't Rabbi Yehuda express his halacha in the case of the greater Chiddush? So why did Rabbi Yehuda express his halacha in the smaller Chiddush, where we know for sure how much he gave? It's because the Tana wants to highlight the starkheit, the strength of the Rabbanon's time. And they say, even though we know with clarity precisely how much he gave his first daughter, still we still ignore that and we only look at the value of the estate. Rabbi told Rabbi Chisda that you know Rabbi Chisda, they say in your name that Allah is Rabbi Yehuda, that we pass like Rabbi Yehuda, that you do go basar umdana, like Shmuel said. That's exactly true. I'm not going to deny that. Not only will I not deny that, I'm proud of the fact that I pass him that way. And Yehirava, Kol, Kihanim, Milimel, Yosa, Tidrush, Mishmoy. Halavai, all these beautiful Piskei Halacha, you should say over in my name. Frank the Gemara, me Avar Ravachi, did Rava paskin like Shmuel that you go basar umdana? Is that the case? Vatanya, Rabbi Omer Bas Hanizonis Menachim, no tell us Isur Nechosim. There's a flat rate based on the value of the assets. The Amar Rava, and Rava said Hilchos Rabbi. So how could Rava paskin? How could Rava paskin like Shmuel that you go basar umdana? You see Rava paskin like Rabbi that it's a flat rate. Zakti Gemara Lokasha Hada Midnei Hadaloya Midnei. Of course you go basar umdana. Rabbi says over here you don't go basar umdana. They give him a flat rate. That's speaking in a case where the Bezin has no idea who this man was. He didn't live amongst them. If they know the person, then they could say what he would have given. But if they have no idea who this person is, he was from a different city, they just have a family of Yisraelim that are discussing the assets, that's where you have to just go with 10%. And in fact, regardless of this kasha on Rava, you'd have to say this anyway. There's a story, you see, even Rebbe once deviated from the formula of 10%, and he gave him less than 10%. He only gave 8%. 1/12 was approximately 8%. So Kashin Adadi, is that not a stira in Rebbe himself? It must be Hada Midnei, where Rebbe was able to assess that the father didn't even want to give 10%. He only wanted to give 8%. He paskin, take 8%. Hadlaya Midnei. And in the case where he didn't know the father, he couldn't make the assessment, so they used a flat median rate of 10%. Shmamina. Gufa. Now let's analyze Rebbe's words. Amr Rebbe, Bas Hanizonis Menachin, they tell us Isur Nechosim, she gets 10%. Amr Lo Rebbe, so they told Rebbe, Lidvarecha, according to you, Mish Yesh Le Eser Banei Suvein, if someone has 10 daughters and only one son, Ein Lo Leben B'Makam Brothers Klum. So the son is going to be left with nothing at all. Amr Lahem, he told them, no. This is how you do it. Rishonim and tell us Isser Nechosim. The first daughter takes 1/10 of the Nechosim. So start off with 100, she takes 10. Shnia, the Masha Shaira. The second one takes 10%, but 10% of the remaining 90. So she'll only get 9. Well, Shlish is B'Masha Shaira. So basically, everyone's going to get less. But now the problem is, why is it fair that the older daughter should get so much more than the younger daughter? Then they all have to put the money that they got from that back in the pot, and they split it evenly 10 ways. How can you do that? I got married 20 years ago. I got a nadin, and now you're going to take the nadin away from me? It doesn't make any sense to say that. Turning on to the Amud Beis, everyone's taking their own things. And why should you have to give it back? And therefore, every woman who got the 10% at the time that she got married, she's entitled to it. So why do they have to go back? This is like a liberal thing of asset wealth redistribution. What type of nonsense is that? If they got married one after the other, everyone gets what they're entitled to. They don't have to put it back in the pot. We're talking about if 10 girls came to get married all at the same time. In Bo Kulam, then it's Cholkus B'Shavah. So Mati said, no wonder the father died. He has 10 daughters getting married at the same time. Now that explains it all. So what does it mean, Cholkus B'Shavah? So Rashi explains that what they do is the oldest daughter, the first daughter, takes 10% of the full estate. We still got to protect the brother, right? So the second daughter takes 10% of the 90. So they each get less. But it's like the election of the conservative leader in Ontario. There's multiple ballots, right? Because if no one wins on the first ballot, they do the second ballot. So that's what happens here as well. First, they allot each kala what she's entitled to 10% of the remaining, but they don't walk away with that because this is all happening at the same time. Then they put all the money back into the pot and they split it evenly 10 ways. So when they got married one after the other, sure, then each one keeps what they got. But if they're all getting married at the same time, then the way you do it is you give each one a little bit less than the one before to protect the son, so the son should have some money remaining. And then all that money that the girls got, you put into a pot and you split it evenly. I'm sorry? He's not going to get, he's not going to be left with a lot anyway, but at least he'll get something. The kasha was, how could you be mevatel the din Yerusha? The kasha wasn't he's not getting anything. The kasha is, how could you be mevatel the halachic din Yerusha because of this not, right? Clearly, Chazal aren't going to be mevatel the halacha of Yerusha the right. This is the right of Masna. The Amar of Masna in Boli, they all take 10%. That doesn't make sense because that means they're each getting only 1%, right? If the altogether get 10%, that means each one getting 1%. So you're shortchanging them. What it means is like what we said. First they take first, second, third, each one gets a little bit less. They put it back into the pot and they redistribute it evenly. Tana Rabban, we looked at the Brisa. Habanos, daughters. So let's just refresh our memories. The Tanai Ksuba that mandates that a father supports his daughters or the father's estate even after he dies, supports his children, his Yosy Simon, is Adati Bagran or Adati Lachan Lagufra. Either until the whatever comes first, either if they become 12 and a half or if they get Nesuah. So Tana Rabban, Habanos Bein Bagru Ad Shalei Nisu. If they merely became a Begaris, even though they weren't married yet, or Vein Nisu Ad Shalei Bigru, or if they became Nisis, even though they're not a Begaris yet, Ivdu Mizaynes, they no longer can collect Mizaynes because the Tanai Ksuba excludes them. However, even if they're adults and they get married, they'll still get their Natan because their Natan is not part of the Tanai Ksuba. Their Natan is a separate thing. Divrei Rebbe, that is the opinion of Rebbe. But Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, Af ivdu parnasasa. In fact, if they get married after they're adults, they don't get Natan at all. Let's see Rashi, which is right across the aisle here. Af ivdu parnasasa, isur nechosim, the 10th of the assets, the 10th of the value of the estate, they don't get that if they're adults. Because Savar, loitukin al nadunya, elahecha de mitzvah bekatnas or benaris. The whole takana that Chazal said that we should give these girls Natan from the estate is only women who got married when they were young. Aval Bogra, once she's Bogra, where she won't get Mizonis anymore, she doesn't get Nad. Neither is Stalka law, Meahi Beisolagamri. They're totally severed from the estate, and they don't even get Nad. V'chein Nosas Benaris. What if she became Nesua when she was a Naira? Hoyluk Doilahi, now she's an adult. V'nisratzas, and she was willing to get married, and she didn't get anything. Therefore, Ibda Parnasasa, she cannot go back later and claim. At the time of her marriage, she didn't get what she wanted. She cannot go back and claim on the estate that I want it back. Alamasha Basku, only what they made up at the time. But nobody's arguing by this is Bekatnas. If she got married as a Ketana, like it says in our Mishnah, if she got married as a Ketana, then she still can go back and claim her full 10%, like our Mishnah told us. So so what do? You have a girl who's about to become a boigris, and she's going to lose now maybe $1 million in Nadin if it's a big estate, 100,000 Nadin. What do? The teretz is, you ever heard of the concept mail order bride? They rent a hubby so they can say that I'm married so that they can extract their money. That's called getting married for money, literally. Zokt Rashi, what does it mean? They rent the husband to marry them before they become a boigris, and therefore and therefore they're able to extract from the estate their due Nachman. Omar Nachman, Omar Lihuna. Rav Nachman said that Huna told me, Hilchas Rebbe, the halacha is like Rebbe, that even a boigris, even an adult girl, will be entitled to her 10% Nachman. So Rav asked Rav Nachman Akasha. It says in our Mishnah, a young girl who was Yisayma got married and she willingly accepted the terms of her marriage, even though she was shortchanged, and not the full 10%. When she grows up and she becomes aware of how she was shortchanged, our Mishnah says she can go back and make a claim against her family, against the estate, to get her full nadin. Time of the ktana. Why do we allow it? Because when she got married, she was a ktana and she was entitled to her nadin. Hagadoila. But if when she got married she was a gedoila, then we say vidra. We say she's given up her extra. So you have a raya against Rebbe. Rebbe said even if she gets married when she's a gedoila, she's lo yivdu panasasa and she's entitled to make a claim. Yet from our Mishnah we're being medayik that as an adult she doesn't give it up. As an adult she does give it up. And as Rashi says, Vitra Mochla al Ashar. When she gets married, if she doesn't take the full nadin, she cannot go back and claim it. Vivadito, she lost it. Almost Stamlon Tana, Kereb Shimon ben Elazar. You see the Tana is possible like Shimon ben Elazar, that if she gets married as an adult, she cannot go back and claim. Zokmarloi Kasha, it's not fair. Really, our Mishnah holds like Rebbe as well. Rebbe says that she has a right to claim her nadin, even if she gets married when she's a gdoila. And our Mishnah seems to say not. The Mishnah is speaking when she wasn't protesting. If she didn't protest and she got married as an adult and accepted this lesser nadin, too bad for her. But when Rebbe said that if she got married as an adult, that's because she's insisting on getting it. So she has the rights to get it. The question is, if she doesn't protest when they shortchange her, it shows that she's accepting this concession. I can actually prove to you that that's Pshat Rebbe even without the kasha that you asked from our Mishnah. From Rebbe himself, it's obvious that that's what Rebbe meant. Then came kasha the Rebbe at the Rebbe, because then you would have a steer in Rebbe itself. The Tanya Rebbe Omer, Rebbe said, Bas hanizonis min achin, a girl who's still taking mizonis from her brothers, meaning she's still a ktana and not a nesua. Only such a woman, noitelas is in nechasim, she's the one who gets the nat. Nizonis in, she'ein nizonis loy. So you see clearly that once she's an adult, she's not entitled anymore to get her 10%. Elalav shmamina, it must be, if Rebbe says in one place that she didn't lose her nadin, and in this brisa, Rebbe says that she did lose her nadin, it must be hadamachai. Where Rebbe said she didn't lose her nadin is when she's protesting and she says, I'm not giving up my rights. But the brisa where that says if she gets married as a gdoila, she loses her nadin, hadamachai. If they gave her less and she accepted it and she didn't fight. Shmamino. So that's Rebbe Shita. Rebbe Shita is that she's entitled to her nadin unless she accepts less. As an adult, she made a concession.
Yosy,
Yes.
When there's no reason whatsoever in the world for her not to protest, why wouldn't we just automatically understand that there's a protest? There's got to be like a possibility that she wouldn't protest for us to wonder whether she's going to protest. It's kind of like it's an automatic protest.
The way I understand the case is that they're getting married, and her family says, "Okay, we're going to kick in $10,000 now, which is much less than what a 10% is." So the question is, does she say, "Okay, I'm happy," or does she say, "No, no, 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 I'm not happy"? So basically, they're giving. It seems like the family they're having a discussion what her family's giving, and she doesn't say anything when they have that discussion. So if she's an adult and she doesn't say anything, then we say she's accepted it. But if she's a katana, then we say the fact that she accepted as a katana doesn't mean anything. So what I thought you're asking is there has to be something that will prompt her protest. And who said that happens? Well, that always happens because whenever they're discussing a shidduch, part of the discussion is who's putting in what money. And that's the point that demands from her a protest if she's not happy with the arrangements that are discussed. So Amar le Ravina l'Rav. Ravina had a kasha of Rav. Amar lon Rav Ada Ba'ava Mishimcha. Rav Ada Ba'ava told me, Rava, that you said the following statement. You, Rava, made the following statement. Bogra, if she's a Bageres, Eina Tricha Limchos. If she's a Bageres, so a woman became a Bageres, and then she gets married, and they shortchange her, she does not have to be Moich. Nisas, if she was not a Bageres, she's a Kana or a Naira, and she had Nisuin, and once again, they shortchanged her, Eina Tricha Limchos, she doesn't have to be Moich. But Boger Venisis, if she's both a full adult and she's getting the suin, and they discuss something that shortchanges her, there it's incumbent upon her to be moicha. Shricha libchos. So let's see Rashi. Eina shricha libchos. So if she's only bogra or only nisis, she doesn't have to be moicha, and her consent is not implied. Shafilu loy michsa loy ibda iser nechasa. She's still entitled. Now the problem is, this is what you told us in the name of Rav. Mi Amar Rav Hachi. Could Rav possibly have said that? Just earlier on this same Amud, Rav asked Akasha on Rav Nachman from our Mishnah, from Yisayma, Vishani lay, and what did Rav Nachman answer Rav? Hadamachi, Hadalaimachi. The Gemara said that if she is moicha as an adult, if she's moich as an adult, then she's entitled to keep it. So when did Rebbe say that she didn't lose her parnasha, she didn't lose her nadin? That's if she protested. But if she gets married as an adult and she did not protest, in fact, she loses her nadin. Yet you just quoted Rabbah as saying that if she was a bagra, if she got married as an adult, even if she didn't protest, she doesn't lose it. So there's a stira in you yourself. In Rav himself. Here Rav says that if she's an adult and she gets married, she doesn't have to protest and she doesn't lose. There's not an implied consent. Yet in our Mishnah, it seems to say, the deek that we make from our Mishnah seems to say, which Rav Nachman told Rav, which Rav accepted, that if an adult consented, then she does lose it. So is the silence of an adult a sign that she's agreeable or not? We have a contradiction in Rav's opinion. So it depends. There's an adult, a normal adult, who is no longer getting any benefit from the estate. She's not uncomfortable around them. She'll call a spade. So if they're shortchanging her nadin, it's incumbent upon her to protest. If she doesn't protest, it shows clearly that she's accepting this shortchanging of her nadin. But what if her brothers were very kind to her? And even though she was a boigress, where technically they don't have to support her anymore, they were being generous and they were continuing to support her. How easy will it be for her to protest when they shortchange her nadin? It'll be very hard for her because you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So they're being kind enough and they're supporting her. Even though they're not obliged to, she's not going to want to protest. So therefore, we don't say that her silence implies that she accepted it. Her silence doesn't mean anything at all. So therefore, when this last quote that we made from Rava, Bagra Einat Tzricha Limchais, that's speaking in a case where she was still getting supported by her brothers, and therefore she would be uncomfortable protesting, and therefore the fact that she's silent does not show that she's accepting this. As Rashi says, Had Amaravan Nisis Benairus Einat Tzricha Limchais is going to commit to the minayu la'achashanisis. It's when even after she's married, they're still giving her money. The only reason why she's being silent is because she's uncomfortable protesting against them because they're supporting her. But don't perceive her silence as the fact that she's being moichel her fair share of the nat. Vitra, that we said in a dik from our Mishnah, that a gedola who doesn't protest, it shows that she's giving up her rights to the natan. That's the loika mitzvah. That's speaking about a girl who's no longer getting supported by the estate, and therefore it's incumbent on her to protest. Amar Ravuna Amar Rebbe. Ravuna said the name of Rebbe. So just to review, we seem to be passing like Rebbe, who holds that a woman who is an adult, a Yisrael who's an adult, is still entitled to 10% of the assets of her family to give her ksuba. Now, to give her not. Now, on Amid Aleph, we had a discussion, is it 10% or is it based on an assessment? And it seems like the Gemara said it's an assessment, right? But whatever the case is, she's entitled to a nadin. And if they shmooze the shidduch and they give her less, her family gives less, and she doesn't protest, the halacha is too bad for her. Unless there was a good reason why she didn't protest, and that was because she was still dependent on them. For Parnasa, her protest, the fact that she didn't protest does not imply that she's agreeable. Okay, now we have a new halacha. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rebbe. Parnasa einoi k'nai ksuba. This halacha that the estate gives nadin is not anything like, nor is it governed by the rules of Tnai Ksuba. When we're talking about Tnai Ksuba, we're talking about this girl has her rights because of the Tnai Ksuba to be supported by the estate until she's a boigris or until she's married. That chiyuv is different from this chiyuv of the estate to give her not. So the Gemara wants to know, Lagabi, what halacha lamaisa is there a difference? So my einik Tnai Ksuba. What did Rebbe mean to teach us? Which halacha did Rebbe mean to teach us by saying that the nadin is not like a Tnai Ksuba? Inema, the ilu parnasa tarfim mishabdi, utaksuba loy tarfim mishabdi. If you want to claim that the great chiddush that Rebbe wanted to share with us is that when it comes to collecting mezonis, collecting the Tnai Ksuba, we know when you collect Tnai Ksuba, they could only collect from what the estate actually has. If the estate sold something to a third party, they have no rights to go to the third party and retrieve that. They only can take from what's available. However, the nadin that she's entitled to, the 10% that she's entitled to, even if the estate sold property, will actually go after that property and take it back, because the nadin is a chiyuv that will even carry over to someone who bought off the estate. So that sounds like a chiddush. But Dr. Mar, that can't be Rebbe's chiddush. My kamash shalom, because everybody knows that. Hamaisim b'chol yoy. Every day we see this is what happens. That moitziin leparnasa, they'll take karka away from lekuchais if it's needed for the nadin of these yisaymais. The ein moitziin lemezainos. But if there's not enough money to feed these little girls, we will not extract a karka that was sold. So that can't be Rebbe's chiddush, because that's something that everybody knows. To us, it sounds like a chiddush, but in those days, it seems like that was very posh. The ella must be the ilu parnasa gavi nami mimetaltali. It must be that we know ksuba you can only be going from karka, not from metaltali. We learned a toisvus yesterday that says that there's a takana saga oinim that for nowadays from ksuba you can take from anything. But ma'ikra did the ksuba or the tnag ksuba you only can collect from karka. But parnasa, this new takanas chazal of nadin, that you'll take even if the estate has millions of dollars in stocks and bonds and mutual funds, but not one property, she will not be able to collect mezainis because there's no property. But nadin they can get. She'll get 10% of those investment funds. In metaltal logavi, is that Rabbi's chiddush? That can't be. Because according to Rabbi, Idi v'Idi mikvah gavi. Rabbi holds even ksuba you could take from a taltlin. The Tanya we learned, echad nechasam sheish lo nachrayis, ve'echad nechasam she'ein lo machrayis, moitziin lemazan ishu lebanas. You do take. Remember yesterday we learned that certain assets the women will rely on. We discussed about the money bag in mechuzah. The Gemara wanted that's just like karka because the women rely on it. And then the Gemara said no, they don't rely on it because they would sell it and buy karka with it. So we were discussing then that the only type of money that a woman can collect the ksuba from is karka, because that's what she's saymecha. Although we paskin and Rebbe paskins, you take from a taltlin as well, and even according to the Shittas holds, you don't take from a taltlin. The Takanas Hagaonim means that you do take from a taltlin, but this is the same sugi that we were discussing yesterday. To the Rebbe. So once again, what is the distinction that Rebbe is trying to highlight between the chiyuv of nadin that's on the estate and the chiyuv mezoinus that's on the ksuba? Elamai parnasa eina yikitna ksuba. It's lichetanya. It's related to the following halacha. A man's about to die, and he proclaims, "Haimer al yazunu b'noisav v'nechasav." When I die, I want my estate to go to my sons, and I don't even want my daughters to be able to get mezoinus from it. The halacha is ain't shaymin. You know ain't shaymin? Because there's a lien on all of his assets as part of the Tanakh Ksuba to be Mefarnes his daughters. So he can't ask for that. It's not his to ask. It belongs to them. It's part of the Tanakh Ksuba. But there is no chiv on him per se to give not. So therefore, if he says, if he says, I don't want my penny of nadin going to my daughters, I want all the money going to the sons, they're shaymin loy, there you listen to him. Shaparnasa ain't it naksuba. The parnasa is not a naksuba, it's not a comment on it. And Rashi says something very interesting that maybe you can help me understand. The last Rashi says, Al yisparnasu shaymin loy, shaparnasa ain't a chayv. It's not a chayv on him naksuba. So therefore, he has a right to say, I don't want my assets being used at all to give not. But who is it on? There's a separate chayv that Chazal put directly onto the Yisoimim that they have to give not. Heicha, but it's only heicha the loy tziva av shaloi farnesam. So it's interesting. It's a chiyuv that's directly on the Yisoimim, yet the father can still impact it. Because I would have thought if it's a direct chiyuv that's straight on the Yisoimim, no matter what the father says, maybe Chazal are being the chayv the Yisoimim to give nadin. But Rashi is saying here that Rebbe Kinyan doesn't know. If the father specifies, I don't want my assets going to nadin, then that removes a chiyuv. Even the chiyuv that Chazal normally puts on the Yisoimim, it removes that chiyuv, and there's no nadin that's going to be given to these daughters. Okay, let's stop over here. And Be'ez Hashem will be mamshech tomorrow. Everyone should have a wonderful, wonderful day. We should have a lot of parnasa and a lot of mezoni. As we learned about mezonis and parnasa, we should have a lot of that.
Yes, we do